think one of the reasons, certainly on my end, that I love speaking to Elinor and love hearing what she has to say is that, I mean, I don't know if you've heard the last interview that I did with her. She talked briefly about like her upbringing and how she sort of skews towards borderline, but like you had talked about that the last time you and I spoke. But there's something about you and I where we have a particular sense of humor and a particular way of speaking about disorders or adaptations that are a little bit like towards the, like we have like some joy and fun and a little bit like a different perspective, not like the I broke it, it's hard. Yeah, we don't have it like that. We've been living with it long enough and we're at like a stage inside of it that we're inside of it like, that was a real gift. Thank you so much. Look at all the perspective it's given me. And now I have like a particular like insight into humanity and how people work and tick and stuff like that. So that's one of the reasons why I believe that you and I, when we get together, we're like gab, 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 and we talk. Yes.
We have fun.
Yes. And then the other thing, the other thing I also wanted to say for people is our intention inside of these conversations is to bring some insight into certain tools, certain modalities, certain things that are out there in the world that are either a little bit out of the box or a little bit like different ideas of how to treat the different adaptations and disorders that are out there. Gestalt might be one of the reasons why I wanted to start with Gestalt is because I have Dr. Elinor Greenberg, who is like one of the, like you have a wealth of information. You've been talking about the history and about all the ways that Gestalt works, et cetera, that I was just like, I didn't know anything about this. I just did it. And so I'm thrilled to be having this conversation with you, period. And then on top of it, my knowledge as well, and us coming together and coming from different points of view and then seeing, you know, if anybody has questions about it or has something to add, or if they want to know more information about some of the stuff that we're talking about.
Okay. Do you want to introduce me in any way, or should I just say who I am?
Please go ahead and tell us who you are.
Okay, so maybe I've changed since last time.
That's right. I'm sure you've changed 5 times. That's right.
But what I go by is the we, that's the conglomerate, that is me, and I don't have dissociative identity disorder. I'm just like a conglomerate of subtypes. Calls itself Elinor Greenberg. Became a psychologist. I'm a specialist in personality disorders that I like to refer to as adaptations, but I use the word disorder so you guys can look it up. My preferred ones right now in order are high functioning borderline narcissists who will accept their diagnosis and working with personality adaptations because they get so overlooked. And I've been a Gestalt therapist since 1974. And I studied Gestalt therapy along with my master's program and my PhD program. And then later on, I found when I started practice that I had a lot of people with personality disorders and that Gestalt by itself, the way I had learned it, was wonderful, but it needed to be changed a bit to fit people with what are called borderline narcissistic and schizoid disorders. Well, I'll start what it is to me, because the first time, and I'll tell you this is the truth, last week or a week or so ago when we were discussing what to do, she says, oh, talk about the theory of Gestalt therapy.
No, I said,
I didn't know anything about that. And she's looking at me like I'm crazy because I'm a senior Gestalt therapist. I'm a trainer. I'm on the faculty of 2 institutes, the New York Institute for Gestalt Therapy, the Gestalt Center for Psychotherapy and Training. I'm going to be I train at European Gestalt Institute. So why would I hold my head? That's because when it comes to theory, whatever I say, there will be 200 Gestalt therapists out there critiquing me.
And by the way, it wasn't necessarily Gestalt like theory. It was more like, what do you like? I wanted to explain to people what Gestalt is.
Right. And there will be 2,000 people critiquing it. So then I decided, fuck it. If I'm proud to say that.
This is in before I do anything.
That's
anyway.
what I always say, because I got the same critiques when I told Gestalt therapists that we had to diagnose, and they told me we don't diagnose.
Yeah.
And I said, we have to work with transference. And they, the Gestalt therapy way that I was told is we don't work with transference because we're egalitarian. We use first names. We dissolve transference in every session. Well, nobody told me how. And that's not what happened.
And by the way, in reality, that's not what actually happened.
That's not what actually happened. So we'll go for it. I'll talk about what excited me is the absolute creative freedom of being a Gestalt therapist. That was the first therapy that interested me. Now, I had been in therapies. I didn't want to do any of the therapies that I had been in because some of the therapists were exciting, but the methods sometimes were very boring, lengthy, long silences. Nobody oriented me. Like, I come in for my first session, I had no idea what therapy was. All I knew is what I saw on TV. So I did what they saw on TV. I started telling about my problems. Nobody told me different. I wasted a lot of time. In Gestalt therapy, we have this very interesting definition of health. And this is what was explained to me. And it's called the contact withdrawal cycle. People have different names for it, and different Gestalt therapists will argue for or against it. So just taking that into consideration, it's a very useful concept for me personally, and I love it. And what it says, instead of getting normalcy as health, instead of adapting people to their surroundings as health, it said this is what health is. And it came from Gestalt psychology theory. It's the ability to look around you and find something exciting that draws you. And it's going to be different for all of us. There's so much data in the universe. There's much more data than our senses can take in. And we're all different. So we can be going into the same room, the same life, the same family, and we will see if we are healthy, we will notice what's of interest to us personally, what we find helpful, what we find scary, what we find pleasurable, what expresses our interests in life, and also what our body wants and needs. If we're healthy, we have both inward awareness and we have outward awareness, and we can become attracted to something. Now, this is like being often the metaphor that's used for this is hunger. We notice, so I'll use hunger as an example, and then I'll run through it as a therapy example. We notice we're walking along the street, I'm here with you, I notice maybe I'm hungry. Okay, so now my awareness is inside. I'm capable of noticing I'm hungry because it hasn't been beaten out of me or starved out of me. So it's healthy. I can notice when I'm hungry. Some people are anorexic. They no longer notice when they're hungry. It's out of their awareness. There's all sorts of reasons, but a healthy person who has been allowed to eat and there's been sufficient will notice when they're hungry and not eat when they're not hungry. And so once you're hungry, you start to notice more data in the universe that has to do with you getting food. And let's imagine that you have money and you're planning on eating lunch out. You start to pay attention to what's around you. Are you going to notice dry cleaners? No, you're going to notice restaurants. So what becomes exciting to you and interesting and of note is what relates to your need at the moment, what you want. So then you engage with it. You go in and you order, and you're able to choose from the menu. Well, that's health in and of itself. How many times have we been with people who don't know what they want? They don't know what they like. They don't know what they're interested in. They eat what other people eat. They eat it in the order that other people eat because they're mimicking. They're not really paying attention to their own needs. So some people were taught that they have to eat everything on their plate so they get fat, because if they go to a restaurant, they're putting things on your plate based on their desire, and they're not differentiating between a 5'1" woman and a 6'8" man. Everybody's getting that same plate. You have to differentiate. So if you can differentiate how much you want to eat, stop when you're full, and you are free then to observe the next thing that gets your attention.
There's so much that I want to say to all of this, if I may interrupt for a moment. So you were talking about all the ways that there's present moment, just to pay attention to what you're curious about, what gives you interest, what, like that in and of itself, that in and of itself, to heal that. One of the reasons why I went to Gestalt therapy is, as opposed to, I'd been in therapy for off and on for many, many, many years, but I'd gotten to the point where I was like, none of that is going to work. I need to figure out a way to like actually have it be in the body. Instinctually, I knew that I had to have it be in the body. I had been in such trauma as a kid that I was like dissociated and not in my body in a way. And Gestalt helped me discover me in my body, what was happening in that moment, and then unravel the trauma response that it was in so that I could actually be present to figure out what interests me now. Like what you're talking about is the very thing that Gestalt actually unraveled so that I could actually be present in my body. One of the things that it did.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, because now there's so many body therapies, but before it was very separate. And Wilhelm Reich, who wrote Character Disorders, I believe, who was my first psychiatrist, suggested I read. He was a body-oriented guy, and it was radical. He was very interested in orgasms and body orgasms, things like that, which was radical. And then he became insane, which was a little radical for a therapist, but not so radical. Usually you start insane and then you get better. He started in good shape and he got worse.
God.
Okay, but God bless Wilhelm Reich, because he started.
It wasn't because I hope it wasn't because of the orgasms, because that
We don't know. We don't know. You know, they say masturbation, you get a hair on your hands. God knows what he did. But no,
go
no.
blind, who knows exactly.
You know, who knows? He had an organ box. But his original work was really very brilliant on the body. So Gestalt therapy, unlike analysis, we're looking at the present moment, which is exactly what you said. And if we just look at the model for the food, we can see where health can break down. We can get somebody who, we just simply look like, can they get through the whole cycle? And if they don't, where do they get stuck? So that's one way of looking at someone, where you're not diagnosing them, you're noting where they have the problem. So let's imagine I'm hungry, but I don't notice. Okay, so I'm going to be working with the therapist on noticing what's going on in my body. As you pointed out, many of us were discouraged from paying attention to our wants and needs. We were fed when our parents wanted to feed us what they wanted us to eat, and we were told to finish what's on our plate. Or we weren't fed. I have clients who had to hide food under their beds and things like that, because they couldn't, the refrigerator was locked. They weren't allowed to take anything outside of meals. So right away, if it could break down really early, the person might not become aware that they're anxious, that they're hungry. What they will feel instead at a certain point is some form of anxiety or irritability. I've had clients that report irritability, and really they're hungry or thirsty. So it's quite primitive. So you can be way back there where they have not engaged with the thing because the signals are blunted. And for people who were abused, they learn to blunt their body signals. So you can teach people not to get signals from their body if you work at it hard enough. But then there's the families where people are just not considerate and such.
That's a gentle way of saying that. They were not
just not considerate. You know, in the way that being in a dungeon is inconsiderate.
Yes, or like torture. Yes, it's just not considerate. Yes,
just not considerate flogging the person, you know, when they want to eat. So let's imagine, and then we get the people that had to pay attention to their parents' wants and wishes, and they had no opportunity to find out what they liked. Yeah. So they know they're hungry.
Yeah.
And they don't know what kind of food they want.
Yes.
They don't know what to choose.
Yes.
They don't know whether they go to a Chinese restaurant, a diner. So they're stopped from getting the food they need because they don't know what they want. So generally the way that people solve that is they go into what's ever closest or what their friends like, or what they don't hate. And then they're faced with a menu. If you don't know what you want, how do you order from a menu? Have you ever been in a diner in America? I don't know.
Are you kidding
They
me?
have multiple pages and pages and pages of things. Anybody could get like overwhelmed with a diner menu unless you come in with a plan, like I want eggs, and then you limit it to a section. So there could be, when at this point in the contact withdrawal cycle, they've made contact, they're in the restaurant, they're going to order food, but now they don't know what they want. So now they're faking it. They faked it in choosing the restaurant because they didn't know what kind of restaurant they wanted. Now they're going to fake, they're out of touch with their authentic feelings. So say they come into therapy the next day and they say, I went to this restaurant. I say, what's up? You know, what are you feeling? What would you like from today? And they said, well, I realized something from coming to therapy, that it's a little strange that I don't know what I want to eat on a menu and I can never choose. And so I want to talk about that. Do other people know what they want to eat? And so now we're working on the issue that of choice. How do you choose? And that is very keenly integrated with what's authentically us. And as you pointed out, Anna, it's not us in a rigid way, us, but us right now. What do we want at this moment? And people, it's a radical idea that people can get what they want. So now we're engaging with the person's authentic self. We've already, you know, in this very simple way, we've got the person tuned into their body. What do I feel? Do I need anything? Then we have them choosing. Can they choose? So now we're working on the element of choice and authenticity. How do you choose? Is it authentic to you? Now the next stage is, does the person take more than they want? Now, a lot of us eat for all kinds of reasons. We do all sorts of things for all sorts of reasons. Some of us cannot stop. Once we start, we're like driven to do more than we actually want or need. Has anybody out there ever had that experience?
Yeah. I mean, I can speak for it. It's like there's this, especially in the black and white thinking, what you're talking about is like it's all or nothing. And so there's this feeling of like, I'll never have this again. So I have to have it all, even if like you shove it in. And I'm not even talking about food. It's like all kinds of things like we'll shove it all in, I'll binge on it because I'll never be able to have it again. Because was stuck inside of some old model of how it was that I was raised. That's what you're talking about.
Exactly. So now we're going into the model, and the model will lead us back to where the model come from. So very organically, we don't bring in the past just to bring in the past. It has to be organically connected to what we're talking about. So when the person tells me, I can't stop eating, or once I go into a store, I can't stop buying things, or it could be anything at all that they feel like they're overdoing, or I give people my stuff, I can't stop giving them things. You know what I mean?
Food, drugs, like saying yes to people, sex. It's like it could be television, social media. It could be anything.
Could be anything at all, doing favors for people. So now we're getting into the model. Well, that's interesting. What are the rules that you have for yourself that make that a problem? And people don't even realize they're following rules. And they say, what do you mean by a rule? I said, it seems like you feel like that if they serve it to you on a plate, you have to eat it, that it's meant for you. Or if that's someone who you like asks you to do a favor, that it's rude to say no, and that you don't know how to say no. So it could be anything like that. And then it becomes, well, where did you get this idea?
Yeah, I want to say something. I want to, as someone who's been inside of Gestalt Therapy, it's interesting because these are two same thing, but two different points of view. And correct me I'm a little off or whatever. But um, Gestalt, what I particularly appreciated and loved about my time in Gestalt therapy is that so much of how my defaulted way of being was to look outside myself for things. To
That's
look
right.
So I was constantly, because I was brought up inside of a household where I had to constantly look outside to see how the people were doing so that I could survive, right? So all of my like wiring was wired towards like that. And so what Gestalt rewired was, even when I would get anxious, that kind of anxiety that you're talking about, my anxiety would have me as a just like automatic, without even thinking about it, would just automatically have me go outside looking for a way to fix that feeling.
Exactly. And
And
so
Gestalt reworked it. So what was constantly, it was talking, but it was also constantly rewiring it so that I was paying attention to me, constantly bringing it back to myself, constantly having it go back to my body, and then un um, for lack of a better word, like what that would do was bypass eventually, like uh wire, like it would tripwire the anxiety in such a way that the emotion that was in there trapped would come out.
yes, because there was obviously a barrier to choosing. And it's exactly it. So things happened in this kind of clever, organic, surprising way. And one thing would lead to another. And I would just play follow the leader, the person, rather than me lead the session. I would start it off maybe, but the person was the leader and I'm following them. And I'm following them as closely as I can and trying to add value. So then the other part with this, just to complete the contact withdrawal cycle, is at some point the meal's completed and most people can get up because they're full and leave the restaurant. But some people hang on to it. They have trouble with transitions. They have trouble knowing what to do next. So they find a reason to stay and order something more.
Mm.
But in the real world, it could be like they're dating somebody and this person, they've lost interest in them. They realize this person is not for them.
Mm. Or job is not for them,
Yeah.
or house
But
is not for them, or whatever is not for them.
and they come into therapy and they don't realize that it's a good enough reason for leaving if it's not for you. If you look inside you and your experience is barren and boring, see, excitement and growth as part of that subtitle is what we're looking for, excitement and growth. That's how you tell it's for you. It's exciting and it leads to growth, not severe pain and disarray.
So I want to really dial down, because sometimes, especially for addictive personalities, which are black and white, all or nothing thinking,
Yes, yes.
excitement can be like high, and that's not the kind of excitement that you're talking about.
Yes, I'm not talking about an artificial excitement. I'm totally noticing your own nervous system and what things. See, that is a substitute for this. Those,
Yes.
those drugs are a substitute for the natural excitement that's built into us
Yes.
when we become absorbed. You take a little kid, like I remember a cousin of mine I still remember, she's long gone. I was a little tot. She took me to the circus.
Mm.
I was so excited. There was so much drama going on. There were rings, there were shows, there were things to buy me. There was cotton candy. And I was just, the excitement was in me as a reaction to things outside of me that I found stimulating in a positive way. When the clowns came on, that ended. I don't like clowns. So
No, very rarely.
but
Yeah.
I learned to like certain kinds of things. Somebody taught me something about clowning, and I'll go into that in another thing. But the great Heather Keys from Mexico did a workshop on humor and Gestalt. And the last exercise that she does is we have to be a clown. But then she says, here's how you find your inner clown.
Mm.
Take an aspect of your personality and you exaggerate it.
Mm. Mm.
So that totally clarified it for me, because I became a vampire. I became Count Dracula. And that was my inner clown, the vampires, because as a kid, my hobby was lepers, vampires, Jim Bowie.
Yes.
It wasn't people with round red noses
Yeah.
and floppy shoes. So if I could be a vampire, I could be a clown. So I was a vampire clown. And that solved my problem with
All right, I want to add something to this. That's another thing that I loved about Gestalt therapy is that it made nothing wrong. You could, so take for instance, what you're just saying is instead of it being some outside thing of like, that's the right way to be a clown, what was organic and curious and like something that turned you on was vampire. That was an aspect of your personality that some people might shame. Like you might have been, when you were younger, been like, that's a terrible part of myself. I don't really want to. No, in Gestalt and inside of that, like whatever comes up is something that we follow and something that we bring curiosity to, and it becomes the map to the key of who you are.
Exactly. So you're a great theoretician, really. You have a bracelet. And you have a great grasp of this. Your ability to put words to your experience
Yeah,
and what it did for you is such a great compliment. I'm very grateful to you for that ability.
Yeah, thank
Because
you.
I'm on, this end, and
But I want to land it for people who are like, instead of it being like theory is great and it's necessary and I'm fascinated by it, and I also want to relate it back to like how it actually helps. Because what I hope is that for people who are hungry for actual, real, genuine tools of how to work, if you have like work with yourself, if you have either an adaptation or a disorder or some skew towards that, or if you are with someone who is self-aware and wants to be able to work through something like this, like to give you keys, to give you a map, to give you some sort of pathway options. And by the way, please, 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 what we do as people is to go, that might work for me. Try it on like a hat. See if it fits you. And if it doesn't, move on to something else. Like this is not all the things that we're going to be presenting are going to be ideas, and you follow your own lead, the thing that you're curious about, the thing that you find interesting, that you find passionate, passion or whatever.